There we go. So thanks a lot for being here, Johanna. And yeah, the idea is to have some conversation about your books, your work, also about Agile, Scrum, Kanban, these Agile stuff, right? Johanna, could you introduce yourself to the audience? Just let them know, like, who is Johanna? How did you ended up writing like 9 books? Am I correct?
20.
Oh my God! So that's a longer story than I thought. So if you could tell them, yeah, how did you start it over here in this your agile journey, right? Your all the achievements that you have done. Maybe a quick story about your life. Who is Johanna, right? Because we want to know more about you.
Okay, so let me see if I can do the brief introduction. People know me as the Pragmatic Manager because that's the name of my newsletter, which I've been writing 20 years. And
wow.
I have very practical and pragmatic approaches to everything in managing projects and managing people, although I think of that as leading and serving, not so much managing people themselves. Managing the project portfolio, how to do agile and lean program management. So for me, it's all about expertise in managing product development. And that's how you probably found me with my work in agile and lean, all focused on managing product development.
Yes, that's correct. So how do you start with the writing of the books, right? Like, how do you say, well, I have this idea, now I need to publish a book, I need to put it over there for the world? Or how is the starting of the ideation of what are you going to write about, right?
So I never intended to write a book. That I started my consulting business in 1994, and I read Howard Jensen's Guide to Consulting Success. And that's when he said, I read this thing, I think the first week I read the book, which was, and this is back in the 90s, that consultants who spoke and wrote made over $100,000 a year. And consultants who did not made $30,000 a year. And I thought, okay, this is a no-brainer. I will speak and write. And I had the speaking part, I wouldn't say down pat, but I'm an extrovert. So speaking feels much more natural. But I realized I needed to write. And so I started to write articles for Software Development Magazine. This is back in the 90s, right? So I wrote a monthly, based on a presentation I made at SD, the conference. The editor for the magazine asked me to write a monthly column for the magazine, which I did. And early on in my writing, I realized that a potential client read one of my articles and then hired me based on that one article. So this is how writing and speaking is supposed to work. Right, there's this reinforcing feedback loop. And then I was working with another client in the Boston area who said, I just can't hire anybody. I don't know how to get people on board fast enough. So I said, in my previous life, I was working with them on their SDLC, their software development lifecycle. But I said, if you want me to add another part of the engagement, I can work with you on your hiring. And that's when I started to write kind of an outline for the hiring. So I was an unintentional writer, although I was an intentional speaker. And now I realize that my process, if you can even call it that, is I start to blog, I start to write about a particular topic. And then when I realize I practice that with my clients, now I have enough theory and practice to actually be able to write about it in the form of a book. I do not say every consultant needs a book. No. And I will be writing a triad about how to write a book, which includes how to decide if you should write a book, and then how to publish and market a book. But that's later on, maybe this year, maybe next year, I'm not sure. But it's really important to say, this is where I apply the how little thinking that I talk about and manage it, and in Agile and Lean program management, and in create your successful Agile project. How little writing can you do to make an effect on your audience, to help them to change? You might not need to write a book. I now really like writing, so I write books.
Nice. No, thank you for sharing. So if you could, I mean, it will take us forever if we wanted to go to each topic of each book and what's the message from each one, but maybe you can categorize them like in big topics, right? These are for the Agile leaders. These are for the Agile project managers. These are for the ones that want to write a book or, I don't know, have a conference. So how would you categorize them so we can identify ourselves as user personas probably and know which one we want to buy? We will put over here in the description of the video, the links for all of them, but I want to classify them. I'm a project manager. These are my 3 options, right? So how would you do that?
So I actually have them categorized on my books page. I say they're management-focused books, where the primary audience is the manager. Then there's product development, which is all about how do we create effective products for our user. And that's all the project management and the Agile and the and then there's personal development, which is how do you write? How do you look for a job? How do you consult? Right? All thinking of yourself as a product, which is kind of a geeky way to think about it, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Thank you. That worked good. Johanna, how would you explain, this channel is all about Agile, Scrum, Kanban, and these things, right? So how would you explain to one of your friends or to another person that has nothing to do with Agile what Agile is, right? That's a challenge for me every time.
So I've been talking about faster feedback loops and decisions, right? How fast do we need the feedback loop to be? And then what is the information we need to make a decision after we have that feedback loop? So I fell into this trap in the 2000s also. But now, because it's really not about a project and it's about product development, I find that projects are a very convenient container for these goals, for what we want to do now, for this set of customers to solve these problems. But I think it's really important to start talking about, especially if we want to use Agile and Lean thinking. Where are the feedback loops in the organization now? Are they fast enough for us to make effective decisions? And then how do we capture what we've learned every time we want to make a new decision? So for me, and I think that when I talk about this with people who don't have a product development orientation, I say, you know how it is to drive into Boston, and it does not matter what Waze or Google Maps says, it's always the wrong direction, right? You need to change your actual trip in the middle of the trip, right? That where the place you're still getting to the same end place, but the traffic changes, so you need to change how you're going. That's exactly the kind of thing I address in my books. So, and they all say, oh, I get that, because everybody understands driving.
Got it. That's a great analogy example of what Agile is. Has your concept of Agile always been kind of focused on, getting feedback loops and then also adapting to these changes like the map? Or has it evolved with the years? How did you start looking at Agile at the beginning?
So I did not realize the value of limiting WIP, work in progress, at the very beginning. I thought it was that Agile approaches and especially Kanban boards were much more about seeing the work. And yes, visualizing the work is so important, because remember, I started to work as a software developer back in the 70s. So I have a lot of old experience, and I find that because we could not use a project management tool, we wrote per charts on a blackboard, and we had internal demos because it was so expensive to send anything to a customer. But we could show each other our progress. And because we could not imagine these very long and large projects, we also limited our WIP back then because it didn't make sense to plan for the entire project when we knew we were going to have to make decisions more often. So even our waterfalls were much less time, which meant the requirements were not going to change as much, right? We had all of this working for us. And then in the 80s and the 90s, with the project management tools and the scheduling tools, and that all went out the window. So I think it's really important that we really think about WIP and aging now, all the flow metrics, because that's way more important. Oh, and right sizing, right? That's way more important than anything we might consider as another kind of a metric.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I agree. Would you say in your experience that I mean, this is a hard question because you need to know the context and everything, but in general terms, would you say that the teams that are doing more agile practices are doing Kanban versus teams that are just starting with agile maybe are doing Scrum, or is that there's no relationship between these?
I think that there's no relationship. I have been a loud proponent of using a Kanban board inside of iterations. I find iterations a very convenient way to think about how do we limit WIP, right? The more we think in iterations, the more we have to limit WIP. And if you are at the team level, and if you are new to even agile thinking, which many people are, then iterations provide a really great benefit of doing that. Now, when an iteration just becomes a cadence because the work overflows into the next iteration, that's when I find that the Kanban offers me more insight as to what's going on, right? So I see project team try and use iterations when they're supposed to work on multiple projects and, well, I should say multiple products and product support. I don't see how that's even possible, right? Why not go directly to a Kanban approach if you're supposed to be literally multitasking between all of this work? Because Kanban will give you the tools to say, wait a minute, we need to put work in progress limits on every column. And we need to really think about what happens if an emergency comes in. Does that mean we need to right size all of our stories in advance so we don't have a lot of work in progress? I mean, Kanban gives you the tools to ask those questions. However, if a team is working on one product at a time and they don't need to do a lot of product support or a lot of operation support, iterations might be a perfect way to start.
Yeah. Okay. So why not take the best of both worlds, right? The Kanban, work in progress, aging, and then also have the iterations, maybe some planning, some reviews, some demonstrations, and some retrospective. So yeah, I totally, I'm on board with that hybrid, say, right? Johanna, I think that the Agile Manifesto was created like 2 decades ago, right? So how relevant do you think it is in today's tech landscape?
I think that the principles behind the Agile Manifesto are as relevant today as they were then. So the principles, I'm all in for the Agile Manifesto itself. Yeah, that's fine. So, but I find the principles and the principles of lean thinking are as relevant today as they were when people created them. So I really like, in my experience, principles matter much more than almost anything else.
Okay, so I have the challenge with some C-levels that tell me sometimes when I want to sell them, our agile consultancy services, that agile is just a buzzword, right? It's kind of a misunderstood buzzword, and it's no more than that. How do you sell them to your customers or to your leads? Like, you really need to be agile in your company, and these are some of the benefits. How do you sell this agile thinking to the C-levels?
So I've stopped talking about Agile with my C-level and a lot of my mid-level manager clients. I talk about being effective. And that's where I say the principles behind the Agile Manifesto help us be more effective. The lean principles help us be more effective. My Modern Management Made Easy principles allow us to be more effective. So that's why I just don't sell any of that stuff. I really talk about being more effective. And I talk about the benefits of flow efficiency, right? If we work as collegial, collaborative teams at all levels, we are much more likely to be effective. Now, what prevents you from doing that? And that's when the manager says, I have so much work, all based on my ability to finish it. I said, and that's where I say, do you have any overarching goal with your colleagues? They say, no, we're all working on different goals. And so I say, that's the same problem in the team, right? Every single person on the team has a different goal because all those people report to managers who all have different goals. So if you want to fix team effectiveness, the team needs one overarching goal. Oh, and how do you get to that overarching goal? You as managers work to one overarching. Oh, how do you get there? Well, you need to manage the project portfolio and reduce all the projects in progress, right? So I use all the principles, but I don't talk about Agile because my clients don't care about that. They don't care about the words. They want to be more effective. They want more revenue. They want fewer service interruptions. They want more service revenue. They want more client acquisition. So it's all about knowing what matters to them. And that's what I do.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because even when you talk to these guys or girls, the word agile just means like that they can stretch themselves or it sounds like healthy or, fitness stuff and effectiveness that they understand, right? So I think it's a great advice. Thank you. So Johanna, in your experience, how have the way we talk or treat or schedule timelines in the projects have been evolving, right? I'm still having the challenge every time when I work with new teams doing Scrum or Kanban, they are still getting timelines top down, right? Top to the bottom. Like, this is the date. I don't care how you do it, but we need to have this piece of code for the next 6 months, in 6 months. How do you deal with these?
So that's where I actually, I use all of the tools I wrote about in Manage It, Your Guide to Modern Pragmatic Project Management, especially the drivers, constraints, and flows. Because when other people say, you need to have this thing by this date, they are putting a specific constraint on the project. And the worst thing is when they say, you need to have this thing by the end of next week or the next 2 weeks. And then this thing, and then this thing, and then this thing, and then this thing. They are not allowing for learning to occur during the project, which will inform the next bit of work. So I actually asked people the 3 questions that I asked in Manage It, which is, if we get to one of those deadlines and we are not quite done with this feature set and we don't quite have the quality that we wanted, we have too many bugs, what decision will you make? Will you extend our deadline? Will you ship it? Will we have to ship it anyway? And what that will allow us to make the trade-offs. Because if they say we will ship it anyway, then we know we need to reduce the feature set so that we can get the quality. That's when I say, what is 1, 2, and 3 I actually say, what is the number 1 problem you want to solve? Because all too often I see roadmaps of feature set, not problem that we want to solve. So that's a different problem altogether. And then if they say, well, if the quality isn't there, we'll have to extend the work. And that's when I say, okay, we really need to focus on the information we get back from testing, because we can have fewer things, but we cannot afford to have any problem. And then if they say, you know, we need all of these features, we will extend, now we know. But that allows us to make trade-offs. And if we don't know what's driving the project, and my favorite thing is when the senior leadership says, oh, we need it all. I'm not going to differentiate between feature set and quality and time to release. And that's when I say, okay, I need more people, right? If you want it all and you're not willing to define what is first, second, and third, then I will need twice as many people, and I get to say how we will organize. I get to say the training that people need, because you are telling me you don't care how much it costs. And then if they say, well, no, I really care how much it costs, I ask the three-way question again. I realize it sounds like I'm spending a lot of time at the beginning of an effort trying to figure out what senior leadership wants. I have found that every single time I do that, it's effort well invested. I get the answers I need, and the team can then proceed in a way that makes sense.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. You mentioned that there are teams that do not have time for learning, right? Because of these tight timelines. I had a challenge like a few months ago with one of the persons, the team leads from a team, and the guy was telling me, Hector, you are asking us to be cross-functional, to learn a little every sprint, the back end from the front end guy, the front end from the QA, because you want us to be cross-functional, right? And because that I believe, and that was me saying it to him, like, I believe that that's something that a team should have, right? Because of many reasons. But he was telling me, I spent my whole career focusing on learning this language, right? Why would I care right now to spend time understanding what everyone else is doing in the team and trying to be cross-functional if I'm very good at this single thing, right? What would be your arguments to tell him or to convince him that this is important, cross-functionality in a team is important, right? So how would you deal with this challenge?
So this is when I ask the team to map their cycle time before a retrospective and ask them to see where the work is above the line, the actual work, and how much waiting time they all have. And because the waiting time almost always far outweighs the work time, that allows us to then say, do we want to continue this? Well, we might or might not, but assuming we don't want to continue all this waiting time, now it's what prevents us from more work time together. And often that's less insight as to what other people need. So every time there's a handoff to somebody else, that's often a wait. So we can fix this in several ways. We can say, how can I make it easier for the person receiving my handoff to actually use it without asking me questions? And sometimes for developers, that's a very simple thing. They put hooks into the API for underneath the GUI testing, or they put hooks into the middleware or the platform that allows for faster test development and then faster test. And often developers don't realize they need this, right? So a little insight into what the next person down the line needs, that's very helpful. The other thing I do is I do something a little different than you do, Hector. I don't tell people they need more skills. I just say, how can we effectively use all the skills we have as a team? And then I introduce the ideas of pairing, swarming, and mobbing. So on my website, I have several blog posts about pairing, swarming, and mobbing, so that I don't care if everybody wants to stay inside their little silo, as long as they understand what other people need from them. I taught a workshop at a very large organization, and one of the guys said to me, I'm not pairing. I'm not going to sit next to somebody and watch them use my keyboard and move the keyboard back and forth. I'm just not. I said, okay, I'm not going to make you. However, do you want to make sure that the next person down the line can actually use what you've done? He said, absolutely. I said, that's why understanding what you do when you swarm makes a difference, right? So swarming is when we have a WIP limit of 1, and everyone on the team does their thing. When they are done with their piece, they sit with somebody else and offer code review in the moment, feedback on design or tests, whatever it is. And that means you don't have to wait for code review. You don't have to wait for design review. And that totally changes how the team works. So I take a different approach. I don't ask people to learn new skills. I ask them to learn how other people use the outcomes of their work.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Johanna, regarding the topic of leadership, right? You have been in a time where project management was very different to nowadays, right? You walk your way through the transition. How did this topic of leadership has evolved in your mind, right? How did you understand it before, and how do you understand it now, companies or the team?
So let's just say I'm a little strange. I only thought of project management as facilitative leadership from the time I became a project manager, right?
Nice.
So I asked people to create their inch pebble. Instead of week-long or month-long milestones, I said, what are the 2 or 3 inch pebbles, 1 or 2 day tasks that are either done or not done, will you do this week? And put them up on the wall on a sticky so that I can see how the entire project is going to deliver this particular outcome over this next week or 2 or 3 or 4. I've been using rolling wave planning my entire career because I never had access to a project scheduling tool. Never, right? So I never used one. So I used facilitative leadership. I think that, in my never humble opinion, the big problem with micromanagement from the project managers was the scheduling tool, and the fact that scheduling tools don't understand how to use iterations to create feedback loops and ask questions to inform the next bit of planning. Let me take a drink. So when we don't have facilitative leadership at any level, we have micromanagement. And we saw this. I mean, the reason the guys all got together for the Agile Manifesto, and I suspect the reason they did not invite me, well, aside from me being female, which is a different problem, is I was firmly in the project management space, and all of them had suffered under project managers who were micromanaging. That I didn't do that. That's a different problem, right? But what I see in organizations now is micromanagement starts at the C level, right? The fact that the C level wants to be in on all the roadmap decisions and say, you must have this by this time. That's craziness, right? That's micromanagement. So it starts at the C level, it finds its way down into the organization. And the more micromanagement we have, the less facilitative management we have, which means that the evolution of project management from back in the 70s, when it was not so micromanagement, to the 80s and 90s, where it was, and now it's back being more facilitative. I think that is all about how do we ask people to deliver outcomes, not outputs, right? It's part of that, and it's part of the evolution of moving away from Gantt charts to boards. I really like paper boards. That's a different problem. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So you mentioned something interesting. You mentioned that C-levels normally are taking decisions of the roadmap and what to build, right? I also know about the outcomes, and I have read a lot about Marty Kagan, what he writes about all the product management and the teams being focused on resolving problems rather than just taking features top down, right? But I have never seen in any company a CEO or a vice president of product or whatever that tells the teams below him, like, hey, guys or girls, we need to increase the revenue by 5%. What do you think? Start building your roadmap or try to build the hypothesis so we can see what we need to build so we can achieve that goal. I have never seen that. Have you seen that? And if you haven't, or if you have seen, how can we transform a company that is just putting the features to the teams to deliver and are not focusing on resolving, business goals. How do you change or evolve this company or flip the coin, right?
So I actually start with the project portfolio. I almost always ask, are your projects returning the value you expected? And almost always the senior leadership says no. And I say, why do you think that is? Well, the teams are slow. I say, okay, maybe the teams are slow, but maybe you had the wrong hypothesis to begin. And that's when everybody sits back and says, no. I said, so let's think of the rule of three, right? So the teams might be too slow to deliver the necessary outcomes. If you reduce the whip for the teams and you have them focus on one thing at a time, they will be much faster. Okay, fine. The second alternative is your hypothesis about what would bring in more revenue is not correct. What is the fastest thing you could do to test that hypothesis? They say, I don't know. Say, well, that's worth investigating. And then what's the third thing that might be an option for you to look at to say, how do we link all of the outcomes that we want to the hypotheses and the roadmaps that we need? And that's when they start to really think and they say, oh, maybe we don't understand the problem, or maybe customer support or customer satisfaction, whatever they've named it, has more answers. And what I often find is many of the answers are inside the company, but they are in silos, right? Customer satisfaction doesn't talk to product leadership, not because they don't want to, but because product leadership is not ready to talk to them. I mean, or somebody on high just hands down information. And nobody is talking to the customers enough, especially not the teams. So if I start to work with these people, we change their orientation from we need this feature set to the problems we want to solve. We need everything, the how much thinking to how little thinking. We change all of that. And I often start with the project portfolio because if the teams are overloaded, they cannot do anything at all.
Okay. Have you been you mentioned that you talk to C-level and you tell them, hey, this is not working because you might be doing something wrong, like, setting up all the hypotheses by your own instead of giving the problem. So when that happens, you made it look very simple, right? They say, oh, yeah, you're right. But I have seen that sometimes they are not willing to accept that they are doing things wrong, right? A quick example would be we were in a project a few months ago and we started promoting or trying to make the teams, estimating story points, right? And top management wouldn't want to let go the hours because they wanted to keep track of how many hours were, delivering hours. I don't know how they do it, but, they still wanted, because of the reporting, they would not go into relative estimation. They wanted to keep hours because of the reporting or because of the micromanagement, right? So they were not really committed to letting go, right? They wanted to still keep them. So do you have some challenges like this one or some, situations where what's wrong, but what's wrong has to do with top management, so they are not willing to change?
So let me practice a little bit on you. Why do you think, the reason senior management wants hours for a feature is because of cost accounting measures. Now, you and I both know they don't really need to manage by cost accounting, but that's what a lot of organizations do. So why would you insist that they give up hours, which go directly to dollar, and use this interim measure of story points? Why would you ask them to do that? What is the benefit to them or the benefit to the teams of moving to a different measurement? Can you imagine an alternative that would work?
Yeah, my understanding was that they were not doing it right. And I have seen in some studies that estimating in relative measurements helps the team plan a little better, right? I estimate a little better. So we were trying also to get that away, like improve the way we were planning, the teams were planning, but also get away from this micromanagement reporting at personal level. And we wanted to take this at team level, right? So the team finish this commitment, this sprint goal, this number of points, rather than each individual being measured. So there were like these two goals, right? Planning and also not being considered as a personal, but as a team. So those were the two triggers.
Okay, so let me offer an alternative to you, and I'm using a different coaching stance right now. An alternative is right-sizing every feature. And so I learned about this actually many years ago, but I realized I relearned it in the last few years. Many years ago, maybe 97, 98, I mean, a long, long time ago, I worked for a very talented senior manager as a consultant. And he said, I only want teams to finish features, and I want them to finish at least one feature a week, right? I don't care. I would like it if they could finish 2, but I don't care what every single person does. I'll get back to that in a minute. I really care that I have something to show at the end of every single week to our very important customers. We are a startup. We need to show something every single week. I would like to show 2 or 3 things. I will settle for 1. And I did not realize at the time that was a form of right sizing. So you could, instead of asking the senior leaders to stop doing something, offer them an alternative to allow them to start doing something else, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't offer an alternative, people don't see the value of change. So instead, you might say, let me show you a value stream map of how things work now. And if we only have the front-end developer working on his stuff, and then the back-end developer working on her stuff, and the middleware person working on his stuff, we don't get a finished feature until the end of the iteration. But you need something earlier than that. So how about we have an experiment to have the team work as a collaborative team? Stop measuring individuals, start measuring the team. And the way to do this is to right size every single feature, right? We, as a team, they will say, can we do this in about a day, maybe 2? If not, how do we split out the value so that we can do first one thing and then the other? So you can see a demo at the end of every week. So one of the things I don't like a lot about Scrum is that too many organizations say, we will do a demo every 2 weeks. Why not do a demo every single day, right? Show a finished feature. And when the team says to itself, what would it take for us to have to do a demo every single day? If we did a demo every single day, we would have to right size our stories really small, not do tasks at the architecture level, but do very small slices, as Bill Wake has been saying for years and years and years, right? What is the smallest slice we can do? And then how do we show that in a demo that maybe we can record? Because we're not going to do a meeting every week every other day of our finished features. And then give the team, ask for an experiment so that the team has a little space and senior management has a little space. Explain about right sizing and value stream maps. Show them a map. And then say, my hypothesis as your consultant is, instead of 3 weeks to a finished feature, we will have a finished feature in 3 days, because we don't have all the waiting time between. And we have waiting time because you're trying to measure cost accounting for every single person. Instead, cost accounting for a team, which makes it so much easier to measure, right? Because we know what team's run rate. We can do cost accounting at any moment for a team. That lessens the pressure on all the accounting people. It lessens the pressure on the project portfolio. It lessens the pressure on the team. And all because we said we will look at our cycle time, we will right size our features and manage our cycle time so we can do something every day or two, not once every 2 weeks.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that when I prepare teams to start doing Scrum, I always let them know that the sprint review is not a demo, right? Demos can happen every day if we can. Sprint review should be more focused on the strategy of the product, right? Talking about the product goal, the sprint goals, result, getting feedback. But you could have demonstrations every day if you're able to do it, right? So I totally agree with you. You focused the answer on helping me solve the example that I gave you about story points, and it made a lot of sense. What other challenges have you faced, like this example that I gave you, in your own experience, right? Whenever there's a discrepancy between some of the proposals that you are doing, and then C-level says, no, Johanna, this is not going to happen, right? Because I don't want to let go. Have you had those challenges?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, one of the big things in the portfolio management is to commit to a team, not to ask people to become a team, to commit to a project. When we commit to a team, we can have incremental funding. We can decide how much to invest. I mean, there's all kinds of really wonderful stuff. And I still get senior leaders who say, no, I want to choose which people are going on which team. I want to choose when they do which things. And I say to them, okay, I always ask, how's that working for you? And they all say, it's fine. This is outside the scope of what I want you to do. Okay. So then I say, if you tie my hands behind my back, I cannot be as effective for you. This is why I bring the conversation back to effectiveness. I don't care about their agility, right? Their agile and leanness, totally irrelevant. I care about business results. So I ask them to discuss again the business results that they want. And when we talk about business results, I often find the managers who are so attached to their process have not thought about business results yet. So this is an example of going meta about the problem, right? They come to me with this problem. They say, I'm not interested in changing how I work. So I go meta about the problem and then say, let's talk about why you came to me at all and the boundaries we can and cannot put on this engagement. So I find when I talk about business results, business outcome that they want, and then I lead them through the thinking, I use all the critical thinking skills in the Create Your Successful Independent Consulting book. And I often do a force field analysis. And I say, okay, here's the outcome that you want. Here are the forces keeping things in place. Here are the forces for change. And then we discuss what's stronger and what's less strong. And that's when I get the breaks. But I cannot, I think, do I even want to challenge senior leaders on what they know? No, I'm not going to do that, right? Story points work for you, and so does velocity. I know it does not work for me. So I use relative sizing and probabilistic estimation. The world is a big place. All of us can use the tools that we need. And the question is, how well do they work in this context here and now? And that's where the critical thinking skills and all the various consulting stances really make a difference.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying about the context is pretty important here in Agile, in efficiency. I have seen many times I join a project and someone said that they needed SAFe, and then I have to be a SAFe consultant because I know SAFe, and that's what the customer wants. And it's like, this will not help you a lot. I know it. You think you don't know it. You think you found your best, framework, but it will not help a lot, right? But yeah, I think it depends on the context and it's okay.
Yeah.
So Johanna, talking about the topic of metrics, how have you seen evolved metrics during these your experiences with customers? In your understanding of metrics, what can you tell me about metrics? You like them? You don't like them? What do you think?
Well, I love metrics. So I love metrics that give us more of what we want and less of what we don't want. So this is one of the reasons I don't advocate for story points and velocity any longer. I count the number of stories we complete in a given time if I am using iterations. I always look for cycle time because I find that's very, very helpful. I'm now looking at aging because now that I've been listening to Daniel Vacanti and Pratik Singh, I know a whole lot more about aging. I always used to look at WIP, work in progress, but now aging, it tells me a whole lot more about the context. So I find that if I start with the lean measures, the flow metrics, that's a really good place to start. I also find that if I look at the satisfaction of every team member on the team as a qualitative measure on a daily basis, that tells me a whole lot about the culture of the team and the culture of the organization. So I ask people to put a sticky at the end of the day, often a 5-point scale, very satisfied, very dissatisfied. And I want to see a daily histogram closer to the satisfied level. I might see a bunch of meh, in the middle. But if I see a lot of meh and dissatisfied, there's something wrong in the team. And that particular qualitative metric really helps me understand where do I need to ask more questions. So I never measure happiness. Happiness is totally irrelevant because that depends on many, many things outside of work. But work satisfaction, that's very, very relevant. So I look for things like that. I also look for defect escapes. In one notable organization, I actually looked at the time spent planning versus time spent working. They were in a 2-week iteration. They spent 3 days planning their iteration. I mean, there's no reason to do that. So I said to them, if you spend more than an hour planning, you're planning way too much. You are not going to need all that planning. And if you happen to run out of things before the end of the iteration, you could plan again. It would be fine. You don't have to worry about it. And they said, oh, really? Yeah, really. So that totally changed how they thought about getting ready for the next bit of work. So I use all kinds of metrics, and I try and have both qualitative and quantitative measures.
Got it. Thanks for sharing. Makes a lot of sense. Regarding the topic of dependencies, how have you seen that dependencies used to be treated, mitigated, planned, detected, etc., versus agile ways of working? How dependencies are treated now?
So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Do you mean with component teams, or do you mean with across the organization, like with marketing and sales?
Well, actually, I was talking about the first one, the component, that the teams developing stuff, but the other one also sounds really good. So if you want to expand, that'll be great.
Okay, so let me talk first about component teams. That's where teams are working across the architecture. So the GUI people do the GUI. The top layer does a top layer. That's the app layer. The middleware does a middleware, and the platform does a platform. And the problem is you don't get to see a full feature until they have all implemented enough so you can see this. So the way I ask, and if the organization is really wedded to their component team, they don't see a way out of it, then that's fine. I'm not going to fight with them. I will say that everybody has to integrate every single day. You cannot allow more than 24 hours worth of your development time to pass before you commit and run all the tests. And they all say, oh my God, that's going to take us forever. And I say, oh my God, it's taking you forever now to integrate. I'm pushing you to integrate every single day so you can find problems early. So I have a whole series about this on my blog, and I will send you a link a little bit later after we talk. So yes. If component teams integrate every single day, now they have a shot of seeing what will work and what will not work as soon as possible. Is this a good idea? It's a better idea than waiting until the end. I also have a blog post about an experiment I did with, well, I wrote the blog post before I did this experiment, but back when we were all inside the organization, I brought all the component teams together into a large meeting room. It was a hotel ballroom. And I said, I want you all, I had 5 or 6 flip charts set up with the feature sets that people would be working on. And I said, all of you platform people, you stand near the feature set you want to work on. Then all you middleware people, you do the same. All you app layer people, you do the same. All you GUI people, you do the same. And then let's see what feature sets do not have sufficient team. And that was an experiment to see if people would self-organize. And sure enough, we had enough teams and team members, which we needed to be a little bit large for the kinds of teams I like, for 4 of the 6 feature sets. We did not have enough team members for the other 2. So we did not start those 2 feature sets. We waited. That's part of the Agile and Lean program management that I advocate, right? You can wait to start feature sets. You don't have to start anything where you don't have a full cross-functional team. Don't start it. That just creates whip in the organization. Now, the other piece about, so that's the component teams piece. So integrate every single thing so you have a shot of having features as early as possible and not a lot of integration at the end. Now, if you're waiting for marketing and sales and HR, this is where I advocate having a decision-based Kanban board. So in programs, the Kanban board is a little bit different. It's almost always based on decisions and information, right? Because program teams, people in the organization that are functional, don't create product. They create decisions. So the longer we have to wait for a decision, the worse it is for everybody else. So I advocate cross-functional program team with a Kanban board with the status of the decision.
Okay, thank you. Makes a lot of sense. Johanna, do you think Agile is suitable for all projects and industries? That's kind of the first part of the question. The second one would be, if not, you consider also waterfall or traditional methods should also coexist. Do you see Agile at some point eating the waterfall methodologies or ways of working, or the other way coming methodology, the traditional ways of working coming back like a bounce of these dates or this time, or what? How do you see the future of Agile and waterfall coming in the next years?
Okay, so I think everything is context dependent. I am writing a little book right now about life cycles and when to choose which, and it's all based on project and product risks. So, for example, say you have a really bad defect you really need to fix now. And you put a cross-functional team on it of 3 or 4 people. They know exactly what they have to do. They know exactly how to, well, they need to work on how to fit it into this product. And they need to get it done as quickly as possible. They will do a waterfall because it's a short project with just a few people. It's only a week or 2, maybe 3, and there's only 3 or 4 people on it. They have no other work to do. They will do, that's a classic waterfall. They will do design. They might do a little iteration based on the architecture and the analysis. They will do detailed design and experiments. And then they will code and integrate and test. So it's fine. Now, I would really like people to get away from traditional and agile. Agile has always been around. In this book, in this life cycles book I'm writing, I talk about how we used agile approaches back in the 1970s. I was on a 3-person team. I was the software person, there was an electrical engineer, and there was a mechanical engineer. We iterated on prototypes. We showed ourselves and our boss progress with internal demos. It was way too expensive for us to ship, but we were able to do everything we needed to do as a cross-functional team using agile approaches. Were we literally agile, whatever that means? No, because we did not ship to the customer, but we had a customer focus and we used all the techniques Agile teams use now. Agile and Lean are a cultural change. As long as people use cost accounting measures to manage their organizations, we will never see the full use of Agile approaches, because Agile approaches require flow efficiency thinking, right? We don't need to measure flow efficiency, but we need to think in flow efficiency and focus on the collaboration of a team, as I've talked about all along here. So we will never have a full Agile approach because the culture of the organization will prevent that. So what do we need to do? We need to use iterative and incremental approaches that do not require a cultural change. We can still use cycle time, we can still use demos, we can still constrain our planning, but they are not true Agile approaches. So I am not too hung up on what's Agile and what's not Agile. I will say an Agile culture is what enables true agility in the organization. But if you have senior management micromanaging a team, don't even bother with an Agile approach. Yeah, use iterations so you can maintain, you can constrain the WIP, and use a Kanban board so you can see your cycle time and manage the WIP for all the work in progress. Don't even think about using velocity. Nobody cares about velocity. Use cycle time and right sizing so people can actually see when can I expect this thing to be done, and demo as often as possible, because what a team does can affect how the organization works, what the organization culture is. But that's very, very slow, and it's bouncing your head against a wall. So don't try and do Agile stuff if the culture is dead set against it. Be as agile as you can by being more effective, right? Really focus on effectiveness. What makes the culture of the team better, not the culture of the organization. Do that, and you're much better off.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So regarding documentation, do you think that Agile has devalued the importance of thorough documentation, or how do you see Agile impacting the way we document?
Back when I was a software developer at my very first job, someone actually said to me, I write self-documenting assembly language code.
Okay.
Or this business of self-documenting code has been around forever, and it's always wrong. However, I don't find a lot of pre-documentation worth it, because things will change during all the feedback loops in the product development. So what I actually like teams to do is to create a draft document of our candidate architecture and why, our candidate design and why. And then hopefully they update all of this at the end of every iteration when they do a demo. Or anytime they make a decision, they update all this candidate documentation. The problem with pre-documentation, right, everything you do before the project really starts, and certainly before it ends, that's all conjecture. What you really need to do is write documentation for projects the way I write fiction. I don't outline my fiction books at all. I don't outline my stories, but I do keep track of what I did every single scene. So every single chapter is a scene, and I say, Dan was wearing a red shirt and brown pants and did this thing, and Jane was wearing a blue shirt and white pants and did that thing. So I have a running document of what I have done. That's what Agile teams need. That's the kind of documentation that finishes a given feature. And in an Agile team, it really needs to be why we made these decisions when we did.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great analogy. Thanks for sharing. So another topic, interesting topic. Of course, when at least I have had this challenge when I'm trying to join a customer on their Agile journey, and they are very project oriented, right? And we want to make them a little more product oriented, right? So outcomes, instead of outputs, etc. So there's always one person that says, well, what about my risk management, right? They are afraid of letting go this Excel with the risk and the status of each risk and etc. What's your approach when you're preaching agile or new ways of working with a customer, and they want you to do risk management? How do you approach that?
Oh, I say yes, absolutely. And I talk about the project pyramid and the driver's constraints and floats. And I talk about those risks. And then I ask them, do you have any other risks that you might want to address? I'm all about risks. I think risk management is very, very important. And I'm going to push back on you a little bit. The whole idea of product orientation versus project orientation was about releasing the team members at the end of the project. If people create long-lived, collaborative teams, it does not matter what they work on. So when I hear product orientation, that's what I hear. And when I hear people talk about milestones, I want to make sure that they have milestones based on outcomes. So I see nothing wrong with the project orientation. I see nothing wrong with risk management. I want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, right? So I agree with you on that part, but I don't see any reason not to talk about risks. I mean, if you know that the hardware people have never given you the hardware in time for your project, as long as you've worked on this at this company, why would you not have a risk about that? If you know you need lab time and you never get the lab time, why would you not talk to them about the risks, right? That a risk register only has value if you understand why you're managing. If you're doing it as, we always do risk management, fine. I can see your point. But I think a lot of organizations have continual risks in continual ways. And I want to see all of their risks and understand how can we break free of that risk in this project now. How do we do that?
Okay. Johanna, regarding quality in these agile ways of working, how has it changed? How has it evolved, the QA work or the QA role between the old times and these new agile ways of work? Is it the same or?
Oh, I think it's very, very different. Make sure this is there. What I have found about QA is that people understand more of the value of testing hypotheses, testing, not just testing the code, but testing all of our assumptions about the project. That QA is a full-fledged member of the team. I wrote an article about second-class testers in the early 2000s, and unfortunately I think that article still holds. Too many people who go into QA don't have enough background in either product development or programming or testing. They are essentially people we take off the street and say, we can teach you how to test. That's not true. Testing is even more demanding than development, and that's because testing is much more difficult than development. So I had been a developer for a decade or so, and I went to a company called Symbolics, which made list machines. And because I was too stupid to be a developer, that's what the developer said, because I did not know this. They said, well, we'll hire you if you'll be a tester. I said, fine. I really wanted to work there. So, of course, what were the first three things they gave me to test? The scheduler and the garbage collector. And when I actually found problems in the garbage collector and problems in the scheduler, and my list code looked like Fortran, because that's the last high-level language I had worked on before Lisp. I mean, my Lisp code was not a thing of beauty, but I found problems because I was a software developer. So, do you have to be a software developer to be a good tester? No, but you either need solution space expertise, which is how do you get to the insides of a product, or problem space expertise, which is all about the assumptions of the product itself. But if you don't have any kind of product or solution space expertise, you are not a sufficient tester. And that's, well, the whole fact that we call testing quality assurance and quality engineering. I mean, how many names do we need for people who check the assumptions of our product? That's in itself a problem of that particular function.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Johanna, what's the most common misconception or anti-pattern that you have seen or challenged when teams are adopting Agile?
Actually, it's the one you brought up earlier, that we must do story points and we must measure velocity. That's the biggest thing I see, because no senior leader cares about velocity and no senior leader cares about story points. If we don't frame our work in the language of the business, we will fail. So we must frame everything in the language of the business, right? This is why outcomes for a product are so important. And we can translate those outcomes for a given project, or even if you must use Scrum for a sprint goal, right? But if we don't know the outcomes we're looking for, we will never get to the place we need to be. So that's a huge thing I see.
Yeah, I agree with you. Actually, the example that I gave, if you ask me, I would prefer to have no estimates, just put the blocks of work in 2 or 3 days and that's it. But in that example that I gave you is because that was the instruction, right? We need to implement story points. So I was like, well, let's try to do it, right? And actually story points normally, in my opinion or in my experience, sometimes they have helped teams come from big chunks of work to smaller pieces, and then you want to get rid of the waste of estimating, right? But yeah, I totally agree with you. Just wanted to clarify that. Johanna, how have you seen Agile evolve in response to these, late months when there's AI, there's remote work? Do you think that this is that Agile is doing something, or we should update our ways of working, or what do you think that? How do you think that AI and remote work is affecting the Agile ways of work?
Well, let me separate those two. Remote work is some, I wrote a book about this with Mark Kilby. So we are talking remotely now. We could not do this in 2000 when the Agile Manifesto was written. We did not have the tool. And I find that too many teams who are hybrid, which is some people remote and some people in the office, have the worst of all possible worlds. They are not able to do the in-person stuff, and they are not able to all be equivalent, have equal access to everything the team does. So that's really bad. I would much rather say, how can we as an organization create a level playing field for every single person on the team? What does that look like? Because we are not going back to the ways of co-location. We haven't been there in years, right? Every time a senior leader says, well, you'll have a tester in Hong Kong and developers in New York, or a tester in Singapore and developers in Charleston. We are not going. The farther you have the time zones east and west, the worse it is. Time zones north and south, much, much easier. So every time management makes a decision like that for a team, they are micromanaging the team's work environment, and that really matters. So we need a way for everybody to figure out, what does collaborative work look like for us? So that's the first thing. And then with AI, so AI right now is very good at marketing copy. It's very good at giving you lines. So somebody in LinkedIn asked me to tell me where an article of mine was that I had supposedly written in 2003. It was about empathy in project management. I said, well, kind of sounds like something I would write, but I did not write that article. And then they gave me a URL that AI had given them, which comes up as a 404 on my site, because I didn't write it. It's not there. AI lied. And right now, as we talk in 2023, for nonfiction, for product development, AI is lying. Now, this is not going to continue forever. This AI will get better and better, and those of us who are smart will figure out how to use it, right? But right now, for anything that's not fiction, AI is lying. You need to check all the sources, and half the time those sources don't exist. So I am in several groups on Facebook, which is AI for authors, so I can learn about this and understand it. But AI is here to stay. We're not putting that genie back in the bottle. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I have also experienced some lies with AI. So there might be some Scrum Masters, some Agile coaches, some persons thinking that they are being agile with their teams, looking at this video, and they are saying, well, I still think that I'm being very agile because I'm doing, plannings, and I'm doing Scrum, and I'm doing what questions would you advise them to do to identify these kind of non-obvious indicators that a team is just doing a framework by the book, but not truly embracing agility? I hope I explained it correctly.
Yeah. I think that I would recommend that they measure their cycle time and team satisfaction and the outcomes that they produce. Are they producing outcomes that change the organization's ability to create great products and attract customers and all that good stuff? Is their cycle time explaining how collaborative and uncollaborative people are, and what is the satisfaction of every single person on the team? I would look at all of that in a retrospective.
So the question would be the last one, and then I will let you go, Johanna. It has been a lot of time. I hope that we can have a second part of this interview, because I have a lot of questions, but there's a lot of stuff to do, and you're great with what you're sharing. So Johanna, last one. What do you consider the greatest success in your career so far? So that's one story. And the other one would be, could you also share a big failure regarding Agile and your experience? And what was the lesson that you learned, right? So the biggest success, and then also some failure with a lesson.
I think that I'm going to start with the failure, because I think I want to end on success.
Good.
And I was once engaged, right? A senior leader in an organization was trying to make this 5,000 person organization agile. And my job was to teach program management to the program managers. They already knew a whole lot of what I was teaching. I did not, I was there, I was inflicted on them. They did not ask for me. Now, I learned something from that. I learned that the issue in program management was not so much about agility as it was product management and the ridiculously long roadmaps and all that stuff. So I learned something very important from that. But I acted as not a good foreign element for change, but a bad foreign element. I use the Satir change model. And the first thing is a foreign element. Well, it didn't take long. I think about 10 minutes into the workshop before I realized I was inflicted on them. They did not ask for this. They did not need this. And they certainly did not need a 3-day workshop away from their programs. So that taught me a lot about my consulting. So that was a very interesting piece there. So I'm not sure, they had the information. I'm not sure if they ever did anything with it. They were set up not to succeed, and I was set up to fail. And that's when I recognized the value of working directly with the people I would be working with at some point before I deliver any engagement. So that's really important. And then as a success, I am a whole person, so I don't know how to separate personal success from work success. So I will tell you that I am extremely happy that I have managed a long career as a female in technology and raised 2 children with my husband who are now working, right? They're launched and have families of their own, and that's really good. And My husband and I are still married. A lot of consultants have really have a lot of trouble with their personal lives. And Mark and I made decisions early on in my consulting that we would optimize for family success, not monetary success. I could have made a lot more money if I had been willing to travel even more. I would have been away from the kids more, and if I might have made enough money that Mark could have stayed home, and then we would not have the marriage that we have, and the kids would not see both of us succeeding as in our professional lives. Now, I made choices, and well, I should say, Mark and I made choices that are not for every single person, but for us, they were. And I encourage everyone, regardless of their career, to make choices that work for their family. And those might be choices that are very, very different from mine. Totally fine. But if we make choices that work for our families, we are much more likely to succeed in our professional lives also.
Looks like you applied some of the principles to your personal life, right? Instead of just applying a Scrum or Kanban or whatever, you made your own ways of working and made it work for you, right? So that's awesome. Just one more question before, Johanna, if you had a time, I know I promised that was the last one, sorry, one more. If you had a time machine and you could go back in time, I don't know, 30, 40 years in time, and you met with your younger self, what advice would you give, right? And this is a good question, I believe, because there are many persons that are very young right now, starting with agility, right? Starting to be agile, trying to understand. So if you came back, what would you tell them to do different than in your experience, right?
I would start writing earlier. It turns out that writing is a way that you understand what you actually think. We think and learn as we write, and my insights about my clients and about work and about life have gotten much more sharp since I started to write. So you don't have to write a lot. You don't have to write a book. Right? In fact, maybe you should not write a book, but the more you blog about what you see and how that affects you at work, the more likely you are to really learn and gain those insights. Agility is built about double loop learning. And when we challenge our assumptions about everything, when we look at what we have done and we say, what's the one thing I might want to change for the next time? We can learn that by writing, even if our team doesn't do really great retrospectives. We can learn a lot by writing something almost every day. So I would tell myself to start writing earlier.
Okay, so I'm going to buy that advice and I will start writing a book. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Well, start blogging first. So you don't have, right, because you write a book, it takes you months or years to write a book. There's no value. So blog, get some value out there, and then keep writing.
Got it. And then I can practice and find my own style, right, of writing while I blog, right? So that's a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Okay. Johanna, it has been a pleasure meeting you, knowing you, and sharing this interview with you. I hope that we can get another time and have a second part. For the people that are looking at this and really liked your answers and what you shared, what are you up to next? You mentioned that you're working on some book, another one. And if we could, so if you can share what are you up to now, and we will add in the description of the video all the links to the blogs that you mentioned, also to your books and to your content, right? So where can they follow you and what are you doing?
So everything is on jrothman.com, JROTHMAN.com, and I will put all the link. I will send you all the links. And I'm working on a book. I'm not sure. It only has a working title right now. I don't even know what the title is. Something like Project Lifecycle, where I'm talking about project-based risks and product-based risks to figure out what makes sense for the work that you are doing now. And that will talk about everything from waterfall and why managers still really like a waterfall. Insert a little eye roll here. And iterative, incremental, iterative, and incremental combination life cycle, and then agile approaches. So that's that book. After that, I have a plan for a planning book. I have not yet all projects start before they start. So I've started to gather information for it. And I at some point, I plan to write my triad of nonfiction books, which is about writing, publishing, and marketing nonfiction. I'm not sure when I will do that. And I continue to write my fiction, although more slowly than I would like. And I have several self-study workshops. I have several cohort-based workshops. I'm always offering more and more stuff. I will send you the links to all that stuff. And I'm on LinkedIn as JOHANNA ROTHMAN, all that good stuff. So I'm everywhere you might be able to find.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you a lot for this conversation. And hopefully we can talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
Like, please, all of this